Good afternoon, everyone. Is this about right? Should I back up a little bit?
No, you're good.
Okay, thank you. Well, good afternoon, and I'm going to speak today on, give a little report and some thoughts on the book that we discussed in book club this past year called Where Your Treasure Is, and it has to do with the Psalms. Starting out, you know, we are a congregation, we are a denomination, a church that takes scriptures seriously. We always have, and we want to continue. We want to understand the scriptures and what they mean and what they are trying to teach us when sometimes it's not clear. And in particular, I have always found the Psalms a bit hard to study. In the first place, there are no stories. I like stories. It keeps our interest. There are really few, if any, doctrinal pronouncements. There are no "Thus saith the Lord." So they're classified as wisdom literature. Now, wisdom is a wonderful thing, but sometimes you kind of have to tease it out. And I can read through Psalms, many Psalms, and I think, yeah, this is nice, and it's over quickly, and I don't know what there really was in it for me that I'm supposed to learn. Well, I need a teacher. And fortunately, there are people who have given long and serious thought to the study of the Psalms and the study of the wisdom literature. And one of those is Eugene Peterson, who also wrote or translated, paraphrased, the Message Bible. It was referred to in the opening, and some of you may be familiar with it. It's well known. He has written a lot, and we took up one of his books in the book club last year. And so my purpose today is, his purpose is to help us get over ourselves, help us think about living in community. In our culture, there's a lot of individualism, a lot of lone rangerism, if you will, and he says, "Oh, that's very fine. I mean, that's the way we are, but we shouldn't think that that's all there is to things. That we're also people in community and need to be in community." And so this book is to go through some Psalms and show us a little bit about getting over ourselves and being in community. So I'd like to do today is share with you highlights from several Psalms. And all these are Psalms that can be quickly read through without seeing any deeper meaning in them. That's exactly what I did for probably the first 50 times or more that I read them. And it may have happened to you that way too. I saw more in it when I read this book. A secondary purpose that I have is to encourage you to keep reading the Psalms. They are sometimes called the school for prayer. And through their words, we find some ready-made prayers by people who've gone before us. And they have words for us to use when we just don't come up with the right words on our own. It helps. The first one we'll look at are actually two Psalms, Psalm 1 and 2. And I will read a little bit of Psalm 1 from the New King James. "Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the path of sinners, nor sits in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law he meditates day and night. He shall be like a tree planted by the rivers, that brings forth its fruit in its season, whose leaf shall not wither, and whatever he does shall prosper. The ungodly are not so. They are like chaff that the wind drives away." And it goes on to that. We're quite familiar with this psalm. This is a favorite one for hymn writers in our church. Those of you who have been here for a long time, we sang a version of Psalm 1 so many times. We liked it. You know, it was a nice song, but we practically overdosed on it. So we're familiar with this. We're familiar with this. Now, Psalm 2 is a whole different matter. And I'll read you some of this at least, and you can certainly look it up. This is kind of the other end of the spectrum. Psalm 1 shows God's care for individuals, how he looks at individuals, how he loves them and how he looks after them, how he rewards the righteous and opposes the wicked. Psalm 2 is a whole different matter. It says, "Why do the nations conspire and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves and rulers take counsel together against the Lord and his anointed, saying, let us burst their bonds asunder, cast their cords from us. He who sits in heaven laughs. The Lord holds them in derision. He will speak to them in his wrath and terrify them in his fury, saying, I have set my king on Zion, my holy hill. I will tell of the decree of the Lord. He said to me, you are my son, today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage, the ends of the earth your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron and dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Now therefore, O kings, be wise. Be warned, O rulers of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear. With trembling kiss his feet, lest he be angry and you perish in the way, for his wrath is quickly kindled. Blessed are all who take refuge in him. This is talking about politics. The kings of the earth make their plans. I can't tell you how many times I've thought about this psalm when I hear about North Korea and Iran and the threats they make. Excuse me. But politics has a negative connotation. We don't like politics, and we'd like to ignore it. And we'd like to not have anything to do with it if we can, but we really can't abandon politics and ignore it, because it concerns all that happens to people who try to live together in community. And that's all of us. You know, anybody who tries to live in some semblance of peace and organized society, there's going to be politics there, and we have to deal with it. So this psalm speaks directly to that. Psalm 1 is easy to love. We like that. Politics, though, is another matter. And Psalm 2, it shows us a whole different aspect of God's care. He's interested in politics, and even in international politics. If you notice in verse 4, it says, God laughs at their plans. He holds them in derision. When I think of, well, some of the international rulers, I mentioned North Korea. That's always one that I think about. I think, you know, he just laughs at them. He just laughs at them. Let them plot. Let them plan. God's purposes will prevail. They can't make things happen. So they may do some damage, but God is in charge overall. He is ultimately going to have things done according to his way. And the kingdom is going to be ruled by his Son, our Lord Jesus Christ. There's really nothing that can stand in the way of God's provision and what he has in mind. Thinking about this and meditating on it, just thinking about remembering it, doesn't take away all the short-term anxiety about what's going to happen next, what's going to happen in the world, because there's a lot of bad that goes on in the world. We can't stop that. But it sure helps. It sure helps when you think about it. Ultimately, things are going to be okay, but ultimately, God is in charge. So this is the first of the Psalms that we're looking at, because I don't have too much time. But this is the school of prayer. The way we can pray, the way we can take courage and comfort from what God tells us in the Psalms. Things that at least I wouldn't have noticed otherwise. I wouldn't have thought about that. The second Psalm we're going to look at is Psalm 46. And this is the one that Eugene Peterson calls unself-help. He calls the whole thing unselfing, getting us over ourselves, thinking about community, thinking about others, and making well, making others more of a focus than just ourselves. Here's Psalm 46. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth should change, though the mountains shake in the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though its mountains tremble with its tumult. The Lord of hosts is with us, the God of Jacob is our refuge. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of her, she shall not be moved. The nations rage, oh, God will help her right early. The nations rage, the kingdoms totter, he utters his voice, the earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us, the God of Jacob is our refuge. Come, behold the works of the Lord, how he has wrought fertility in the earth. He makes wars cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow, shatters the spear. He burns the chariots with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I am exalted above the nations. I am exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. This psalm gives us a prayer to pray in the midst of violence. We see violence all around us, constantly, pretty much everywhere we look. There's violence in nature, violence in interpersonal relationships, political violence, like riots in our cities, and military violence among nations. But even though the imagery in this psalm is about violence, the psalm really isn't about violence. It's about God. And it's about the help that he gives even in the midst of violence. He's referred here to both the Lord of hosts, that's an old version. In Peterson's Message Bible, he calls him God of the angel armies. I really like that. That's a whole different, I've just never thought about that. It means pretty much the same thing, but God of the angel armies. That sounds like real power. But he's also called the God of Jacob. It shows a care for a person as an individual. Jacob wrestling with, the picture of Jacob, who wasn't always a really nice man. You remember the story, how he cheated his older brother out of the birthright. He was a kind of a trickster and kind of a deceptive person, but God cared about him. And so he's called here the God of Jacob. So it shows, that God cares about even those of us who don't exactly have sterling character, and that could be all of us. But anyway, this is a reminder that God is able to help us both as individuals and as communities and nations. And what kind of help does he give? Well, according to the psalm, he causes fertility in the earth, and he causes wars to cease. Sometimes he gives us the help we need rather than the help we want. And I think about this when I hear about forest fires raging, that maybe this is the help we need. That I've heard that modern principles of forestry are that a forest really needs to be cleared out and maybe burned if necessary because of some of the pests that get in there, at least every 175 years on average. Some forests need it oftener. A few forests in some places don't ever get burned because it's just too wet there. But overall, the fire that certainly we're frightened of, it's terrifying and destructive, but ultimately that's how the forest renews. And what about the volcanoes and the earthquakes and the hurricanes? This whole earth is so complex that it's impossible to fully understand it. But apparently all of these natural disasters work toward making the earth fertile. Volcanoes spew up a lot of ash. The lava that comes out of the volcanoes in Hawaii is fairly quickly eroded. It hits the water, and it leaves nutrients, elements that come up from the center of the earth that were here. It renews the face of the earth. The magma, and on land, oftentimes it doesn't really come out as lava. On land, we usually have magmas that are down a little bit below the surface, but they're coming up, they're being welled up from the core of the earth, and they bring nutrients. And then the rock cycle, things weather away, and the earth is renewed. And this happens all the time. Some of the things that go into it are very difficult to take sometimes. It's violent, and it can be destructive. But yet, ultimately, it's the help that the earth needs. And there's so much, every place you look, seeing the wonders that God has done. We can't understand it. The winds, the hurricanes, and so forth, the high winds that come, well, they're very destructive, and we're scared of them, of course, and should be. But somehow it seems that scientists seem to be finding that all this is necessary for the circulation of air that regulates our climate to be as good as it is. If the air were stagnant, if it didn't move, we wouldn't have a habitable earth. I don't think there's really time here to talk about the problem of good, but it's something to consider. We hear that everybody sees the problem of evil, and people say that people that don't really believe in God or aren't sure, they say, well, if there's a God, a good God, why do we have so much evil? Conversely, maybe we should think, if there isn't any God, why should there be so much good in the earth? Why should things work together so well? Scientists sometimes call this the Goldilocks enigma, or the Goldilocks question. Why is everything just right for life? Every place you look, and if you begin to study it, you see this keeps coming up. Why is there so much good? And, well, I think we have kind of a hint here. We know that it's because God made it that way. He can make it that way without being obtrusive. He doesn't get in the way. He doesn't have to shout at us. But as we look, we begin to see. God sees what needs to be done in the world to keep the world going and protect the life. He also says in Psalm, he makes wars cease. They do eventually end. Each one seems to eventually end. And we don't know exactly how he makes that happen. It isn't always obvious, of course, but somehow they do end. And we can be confident, I think, that he was at work behind the scenes. And then finally, to encourage us in our part of prayer in the midst of violence, we're told, be still and know that I am God. This is an invitation to repeated and leisurely meetings with the personal living God. That's an amazing opportunity. We can talk to him. We can also listen to what he has to say. And this is how trust and friendship are built. Time spent together, listening, doing some talking, but doing a lot of listening too. It kind of seems presumptuous, doesn't it, to think that we could be friends with God? It does to me. And yet, Jesus called his disciples friends, and I think, as far as we can tell, he would like to be friends with us too. He called Abraham a friend of God. We can be his friends too. The third and last section that the psalm we're going to look at is Psalm 77. And this is actually almost entertaining. It is entertaining. And this is called Unself-Pity. Psalm 77. We'll just read the first, about the first 9 verses at first, and then talk about it. I cry aloud to God that he may hear me. In the day of my trouble, I seek the Lord. In the night, my hand is stretched out without worrying. My soul refuses to be comforted. I think of God and I moan. I meditate. My spirit faints. You hold my eyelids from closing. I am so troubled that I cannot speak. I consider the days of old. I remember the years of long ago. I commune with my heart in the night. I meditate and search my spirit. Will the Lord spurn forever and never again be favorable? Has his steadfast love ever ceased? Are his promises at an end for all time? Has God forgotten to be gracious? Has he in anger shut up his compassion? And I say, it is my grief that the right hand of the Lord of the Most High has changed. Okay. The psalm is about self-pity, feeling sorry for ourselves. In some ways, this may be the most helpful of all the concepts we're discussing today. There's actually a lot of this kind of talk in the Psalms. Sorry, I'm trying to put on my glasses. If anybody thinks that the Psalms are all godly praise and piety, they haven't read the Psalms. And there's an awful lot of the bad stuff that we see in ourselves. And we'll look at the first few verses again. We feel kind of sorry for the psalmist, but it's almost funny too, where he says, in the day of my trouble I seek the Lord, in the night my hand stretched out without word, my soul refuses to be comforted. Like, I'm in a bad mood, I'm hurting, but I think I'd like to stay that way for a while. Don't try to comfort me. Don't make me feel better. I think of God and I moan. I meditate, my spirit faints. Will the Lord spurn forever and never again be favorable? Has his steadfast love forever ceased? Are his promises at an end for all time? Now, we feel kind of sorry, but it's kind of funny too when we hear somebody else moaning and wailing like this. But if we're honest with ourselves, if I'm honest with myself, I know I've talked to myself like that. I've maybe not prayed it, but I felt sorry for myself. This is what we call a pity party. Maybe I should assume that you haven't ever done this, but I've certainly thrown pity parties for myself. And I think very possibly a few of you have too. The facts in our pity parties are really not in dispute. We do have troubles. Other people do have more. They are healthier and smarter and richer and more athletic and better looking and more successful. Maybe we should think about these things in terms of trying harder or making the best of what we have. But so often we don't really look for ways to improve. It's just settling to envy and feeling sorry for ourselves. Maybe we don't. We'll say some of us do. And then we blame others. Sometimes we even blame God. And Peterson says that the antidote to this is prayer. As you read the Psalms, you see a lot of complaining, a lot of moaning and wailing and going on. These Psalms are called laments by people that study them. And I've read that up to 70% of the Psalms can be classified, at least in part, as laments. There's some aspect of this. This isn't the kind of thing we like to focus on. This isn't the kind of thing that people who write hymns and praise songs usually go for. But they're there. And when you start reading, you will see them. You will see them a lot. In the laments, what we can learn from it, though, is in these laments, the psalmists address God openly. He addresses them bluntly, and even rather rudely sometimes. But the surprising thing to me is God doesn't seem to mind. Actually, they're there in the Bible. Nobody says you shouldn't say this. He just lets them talk it out. He lets them talk it out until mysteriously something changes. Listen to the last part of the psalm. We're going to pick up in verse 10. After all the complaint, I refuse to be comforted. Has he thrown us off forever? And then abruptly he says, I will call to mind the deeds of the Lord. Yes, I will remember your works of old. I will meditate on all your work and muse on your mighty deeds. Your way, O God, is holy. What God is great like our God? You are the God who work wonders, who have magnified your might among the peoples. You did with your arm redeem your people, the sons of Jacob and Joseph. When the waters saw you, O God, when the waters saw you, they were afraid, and the deep trembled. The clouds poured out water, the skies gave forth thunder. Arrows flashed on every side. The flash of your thunder was in the whirlwind, the lightnings lighted up the world. The earth trembled and shook, the way through the sea, your path through the great waters, yet your footprints were unseen. You did lead your people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. Because this was written a long time ago, he's talking back about the Exodus and how God delivered his people. And all of a sudden, from poor me, I'm feeling so bad I don't even want to feel better, to, oh, let me think about, I'm thinking now about your wonderful works. Something has changed. The circumstances may not. There's no indication here what, if anything, God has done to deliver him from whatever was troubling him. But now, all of a sudden, the outlook is completely different. And this is an important point about the complaining. As unproductive as self-pity really is, it's not forbidden. God doesn't forbid it, because any place is the right place to start praying. He'll meet you on any road you're on. And you can talk your frustrations and complaints out, and then your thoughts will begin to turn away from the self-absorption to appreciate what God has done. It's something very comforting to remember. That when you feel bad, you can talk it out. This is just a brief look at a few Psalms. There's so much to appreciate in the Psalms. But in conclusion, I want to just summarize by three points, three major lessons that I think we can learn from the Psalms we've just read. The first is that God is interested in nations and governments, not just individuals. He knows the number of hairs on our head and sparrows that can't fall to the ground without our Father seeing and caring. But that's not all. He watches over nations, too. And he watches over our communities, our cities, all the nations of the world. The second point is, behold the works of God to see the help he gives. The fertility in the earth and making wars to cease, among others. These things are not always obvious, but as we begin to grow attentive, we can sometimes get a glimpse of what he's done. We'll never understand it all, but the more we see, the more grateful we become. And the third point, last point, is no matter how bad you feel, you can talk it out with God. He doesn't seem to mind. He knows your thoughts anyway, so there's really no need to pretend that everything is all right when it isn't. And somehow, in talking it all out, he reaches out to comfort you. He does. This comes up over and over again in the Psalms. He reaches out to comfort. You'll feel a lot better, and it makes up for a much happier life. This was the book that we read in book club last year. It was a lot of fun. It was a very enjoyable book. It was well written with lots of insights. The next session of book club is going to start, I think, in September, and a book has been selected. It's called Blessed Are the Misfits. It's a little shorter book, and it's not long. It's a very easy read, and he talks. The subtitle. What's the subtitle? Great news for believers who are introverts, spiritual strugglers, or just feel like they're missing something. There'll be something for everybody in this book. I've kind of reviewed it before we get started on it, and I think it will just be fun, a lot of fun, and very helpful. Don't we all kind of feel like we're misfits in one way or another? This author certainly does, and he presents it very well. So I'm looking forward to book club, and I hope, if you're interested, that you will too. I think there will be some announcements soon about how to order the books, that the congregation will order books, and then we can buy them from there. So thank you.